where the hell did this come from? Not the Bible. In our earliest scriptures, the belief among the Israelites was that your body was formed from the earth, like Adam, and it began to exist once God breathed life into it. That first breath was taking in the Spirit of God. In fact, spirit and breath are the same word. And so they believed a person existed as long as the body had the spirit or breath of God moving through it. And once that breath stopped, you just cease to exist. But about 200 years before Jesus comes along, that idea began to shift, and people began to think that there was something there for those who were truly righteous. They believed that God was going to create this new kingdom on earth, this new garden, where here on earth, not somewhere up above the clouds, but here on earth, there was going to be a beautiful new garden, and all the people who were just would live there. In fact, those who died and had just good lives would be reanimated. That breath, that spirit would be put back into their bodies, and everyone would be here walking with God. I think that's so beautiful. And so when Jesus and the disciples come along, this is kind of like the train of thought. But they believed those who were not good and just ceased to exist, like everyone else. Once that spirit was not in you, you just didn't exist. You were nothing. And so when we see Jesus talking about things like the weeds will be burned, the chaff, what's not needed would be burned away, or things like when he says those who believe will have eternal life, they believed that the others were just ceased to exist. There was an idea that maybe it was through fire, like in Gehenna, where people were burned alive. Maybe there was some torture involved before they died as punishment, but these were all different thoughts. But the baseline thought was those who were good had eternal life, everyone else just ceased to exist. And this carried through the early church fathers, but what we see is as the Gentiles came into this new faith, they brought a lot of Greek thought. And Greek thought was that there was a soul, there was this other part that animated a body. And so like Plato's idea of a soul became intertwined with this new Christianity. So then the question was, what happens to the soul? Now, early on, there were kind of two camps. One was universalism. These church fathers thought that God's sovereign nature would overcome evil in the end, and that all would be reconciled to God. Then there was the nihilist group, the group that thought that anyone who was not just would just cease to exist. That either you were just in your soul and you continued on into eternal life, or you were gone. Now, that might have been in fire, that might have been with some torture, but you were gone. You just ceased to exist. Then we see Augustine and these other fathers come along who were steeped like this with Plato. And we see more of an idea of maybe the soul is tormented. Maybe there's this conscious torment that happens. And when they started to sell the idea, it started to bring more people to church and brought more people under the church's power of truly being fearful of this idea of eternal torment. It was a good business model, basically. And unfortunately, today it still is. Now, there are so many denominations and so many choices of churches out there, and there are so many varied beliefs on this. But the idea that God, who through Jesus said to turn the other cheek when someone hurts you, to forgive others, would not forgive the beings that he created so that they could have some kind of peace doesn't make sense. Like, why would a God who is filled with love and grace punish you for eternity for something that you did for just the short period you were here on earth? Unfortunately, this has done so much damage. This has caused so much trauma and harm to so many people, adults and children, who have come through these teachings, and it needs to stop.